June 23rd, 1940. Before dawn, Paris, a single photograph. Hitler in field grey before the Eiffel Tower, architect Albert Speer and sculptor Arno Breker on either side, the city still grey and quiet in the early morning. The conqueror, surveying what he has won. By the summer of 1940, Adolf Hitler had achieved what the Kaiser's generals had spent 4 years failing to accomplish. That same afternoon, he visited Napoleon's tomb. He stood at the sarcophagus for a long time. One of the two nations that had declared war on Germany in September 1939 was still in the fight, and it was giving no sign of standing down. In his diary, dated July 13, 1940, the chief of the German Army General Staff, a bespectacled Bavarian named Franz Halder, and a man who carried a notebook everywhere and filled it with meticulous precision, recorded a single observation about his supreme commander. It's my impression that the Führer is still unsure and doesn't know what to do. This is a story about why he didn't know, and about a decision made 6 weeks before that entry was written, in secret in a paneled room in Whitehall, that Adolf Hitler never found out about. His wish for an Anglo-German understanding was not new. It ran through his thinking like a fixed thread. A respect for the British Empire, a belief that it and the Reich could divide the world without conflict. He had written about it. He had said it privately, repeatedly. Even after the war began, even after Dunkirk, he expected Britain to reach the same calculation he had already reached, that the position was hopeless and that terms were available, and that the sensible course was to talk. On the face of it, the arithmetic supported him. In 43 days, Germany had done what 4 years of grinding carnage on the Western Front had failed to accomplish. France was gone. The British Expeditionary Force had been driven into the sea. It had saved most of its men at Dunkirk, some 338,000 soldiers lifted from the beaches, but had left behind almost everything else. Tanks, artillery, rifles. Britain's army had come home alive and nearly unarmed. America was neutral. The Soviet Union was Germany's treaty partner. The Wehrmacht stood on the French coast and looked across a channel narrow enough on a clear day to see the other side. Hitler did not want to invade England. He said so to his generals more than once. And he wanted Britain to understand its position and come to terms. He was looking for capitulation. He expected it to come. He had no idea it had already been refused. The refusal happened between May 25th and May 28th, 1940. It happened in a cabinet room in Westminster with 5 men, and nobody in Berlin knew a word of it. The 5 were Winston Churchill, Lord Halifax, Neville Chamberlain, Clement Attlee, and Arthur Greenwood. Churchill had been Prime Minister for 15 days. The Dunkirk beaches were filling with soldiers. France was dying. The arithmetic was exactly as bad as it looked. Halifax was the man who had looked at the arithmetic most carefully. Halifax was not a coward. Lord Halifax, tall, reserved, impeccably suited, the former Viceroy of India, to the King's preferred choice to succeed Chamberlain, was a patriot who believed he was doing what patriotism required. He had looked at the numbers and concluded Britain could not win. A negotiated peace, brokered through Italy's Mussolini while terms were still available, might preserve the empire and spare the British people from a war that could only end in their destruction. On the morning of May 26th, he told his colleagues it was time to face facts. Britain's goal, he said, could no longer be the defeat of Germany. It had to be the safeguarding of what remained. Better to seek terms now, he argued, than after the army was lost and the cities were in flames. Churchill's response was immediate and volcanic. Nations that went down fighting, he said, rose again. Nations that surrendered tamely were finished. Soon the chances of decent terms were, he told Halifax directly, 1,000 to 1 against. Halifax threatened to resign. For 2 days, the cabinet was deadlocked. Halifax was not unreasonable. Chamberlain, still leader of the Conservative Party, still carrying enormous political weight even as his health was quietly failing him, had not committed either way. The momentum could have gone either direction. On the afternoon of May 28th, between two formal War Cabinet meetings, Churchill convened the Outer Cabinet. 25 ministers who were not part of the Inner Five. He told them plainly what was at stake. He told them he had considered whether it was his duty to explore negotiations. He said it was idle to think they would get better terms by trying to make peace now than by fighting it out. And then, according to Hugh Dalton's account, the only record we have of that specific meeting, he said this: "If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his blood upon the ground." The ministers wept. Several came forward and clapped Churchill on the back. Halifax was not in the room. That evening, when Halifax tabled a final French suggestion for joint mediation, the other War Cabinet members showed so little interest that Halifax did not bother to call for a vote. He did not change his mind. He went to his diary that night and wrote that he believed Churchill's approach would lead to catastrophe. But he watched his position go unchosen. He was not outvoted. He was simply outweighed by something arithmetic could not measure. Britain's internal war was over. The answer was no, and no one in Berlin knew a word of it. 6 weeks pass. Germany celebrates. Paris is occupied. Field marshals' promotions are being prepared. And at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat above Berchtesgaden, beneath oil paintings, above the alpine meadows, through the great window overlooking the Untersberg, the generals arrived to present their plans. July 13th, 1940. Hitler meets von Brauchitsch and Halder. Detailed plans for an assault. 39 divisions. Approximately 500,000 men, a landing on a broad front from Ramsgate to the Isle of Wight. On land, these plans are sound. The Wehrmacht has just conquered France in 6 weeks. There is every reason to believe it could do the same to England, if it could get there. Hitler, according to Halder's diary, asks no questions. No interest in specific operations, no recommendations. So he tells OKW to begin preparations and does nothing else. Then Halder sets down what he makes of it. The Führer is greatly puzzled by Britain's persisting unwillingness to make peace. He sees the answer, and here come 3 words that say everything. As we do in Britain's hope on Russia. The parenthetical is Halder's own. The chief of the German army, General Staff, shares his supreme commander's misreading. Both men believe Britain is waiting for something. A Russian entry, an American intervention, some external factor that will change the odds. They cannot conceive of Britain having already decided, simply and permanently, that it will not talk. Hitler's own analysis, recorded in the same entry, has a strange, trapped quality. He sees the strategic problem with unusual clarity. Crushing Britain destroys the British Empire, and when the beneficiaries will be Japan and America, not Germany. He can see the trap. He cannot escape it. He does not want to invade. He wants Britain to choose not to be invaded. And he cannot understand why it won't. Halder's conclusion. It's my impression that the Führer is still unsure and doesn't know what to do. This is the private face of German High Command in the summer of 1940. Not triumphant certainty, genuine bewilderment. Then there is Raeder. Erich Raeder, Grand Admiral, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine. 64 years old, rigidly erect, the highest naval rank in Germany. His fleet, after the Norway campaign, amounts to 1 heavy cruiser, 3 light cruisers, and 4 destroyers. The Norwegian operation had been successful and almost entirely ruinous. The German surface fleet had paid for its victory with most of its strength. What remains is barely adequate for coastal defense, let alone a contested amphibious crossing of one of the most heavily patrolled stretches of water on Earth. And yet Raeder's private fear, expressed in memoranda, in conferences, in his own memoir, was not that Britain would refuse to surrender. It was that when Britain did surrender, Hitler might offer terms that were too soft, that a compromise peace might leave Britain strong enough to eventually ally with America against Germany. He is calculating the conditions he needs attached to the expected British capitulation. Hitler is perplexed that Britain won't come to terms, or his Grand Admiral is calculating how to prevent him from being too generous when it finally does. Both men are operating on the assumption that British capitulation is a matter of when, not if. In Whitehall, the answer had already been given, and the answer was never. Hermann Göring, meanwhile, required no such nuance. The newly created Reichsmarschall, a rank invented specifically for him, had told the German public in a broadcast that if even a single enemy aircraft flew over German soil, they could call him Meyer. He wore a white uniform of his own design, received visitors at his country estate in hunting furs, and believed, sincerely and completely, that air power alone would do what the Navy couldn't. 3 services, 3 contradictory plans, and at the summit, a Führer who doesn't know what to do. On the evening of July 19, 1940, the Kroll Opera House in Berlin is full. 9 generals receive their field marshal's batons. Göring receives his new rank before the assembled diplomatic corps. Germany is transmitting live to 30 countries. This is the Reich at its absolute zenith. And when the ceremony concludes, Hitler addresses the world. He calls it, in the transcript, a last appeal to reason. He says, "In this hour, I feel it to be my duty before my own conscience to appeal once more to reason and common sense in Great Britain as much as elsewhere." He says he speaks not as a vanquished foe, but as the victor, in the name of reason. Before the Foreign Office in London has drafted a single word of official response, a BBC broadcaster named Sefton Delmer, a man who will later become the architect of British black propaganda, takes the microphone. He is not authorized to speak. Nobody has told him what to say. He listens to Hitler's appeal, and he speaks. "Herr Hitler," he begins, "and then we hurl it right back at you, right in your evil-smelling teeth." He upsets a few members of parliament. He's not ahead of public opinion. He's exactly where it is. A few weeks later, German bombers drop propaganda leaflets over the towns of southern England, the full text of Hitler's Reichstag speech, translated, showering down over Harwich and London in the darkness. The British public collects them. Some frame them as souvenirs. Some use them as toilet paper. There is no anger, just a flat, particular contempt. So Hitler's last peace proposal was aimed at a country that had already refused him, in a room he never knew existed, 6 weeks before he made it. Führer Directive No. 16 is dated July 16, 1940. Its opening line: "Since England, in spite of a hopeless military situation, shows no signs of being ready to come to an understanding, I have decided to prepare a landing operation against England and, if necessary, to carry it out." The phrase, "if necessary," appears twice. He is still hoping it will not be necessary. The planning that follows immediately reveals a problem with no clean solution. The army wants 39 divisions on a broad front, 500,000 men crossing the Channel in successive waves, armor and motorized infantry behind the initial assault. On paper, given what these divisions did to France, the plan is coherent. And the Navy presents its available transport. Germany has no purpose-built landing craft. The solution is river barges, flat-bottomed craft designed for the Rhine and the Elbe, now requisitioned from across occupied Europe and gathered in the harbors of Calais, Boulogne, and Dunkirk. 1,722 barges. A soldier who experienced a trial crossing would later compare it to attempting the Channel in a bathtub. From Cap Gris-Nez, the closest point of France to England, the white cliffs of Dover are visible on a clear day. 34 kilometers of apparently manageable water. German officers stand on that shore and look across at the cliffs. Kesselring, the Luftwaffe commander, chafes at the inaction. The beaches are right there, and what the view from Cap Gris-Nez conceals. Tidal currents running at 3 to 5 knots through the Strait of Dover. Autumn gales from the southwest, the British home fleet with a strength that dwarfs anything Germany can put to sea. And the flat-bottomed river barges sitting in the harbor chop at Calais, visibly struggling even before leaving the dock. The soldiers watching them require no military expertise to understand the problem. Behind closed doors, the three services are barely concealing mutual contempt. Jodel's memorandum describes the operation as a river crossing on a broad front. The Kriegsmarine finds this description maddening. At conference after conference, Raeder explains that safe passage can be guaranteed only on a narrow front. The army says a narrow front is tactically suicidal. Göring says the Luftwaffe will handle it. Raeder says the Luftwaffe cannot protect river barges in a tidal current. Meanwhile, a clock none of them are watching is running. In July 1940, Britain can field 6 divisions on her own soil. 6. By September, that figure is 20. Every week of German inter-service feuding is a week of British rearmament. Every conference where Raeder explains why the Navy needs until May 1941 is a week of British tanks rolling off assembly lines. The window exists. It is closing. Germany cannot stop arguing long enough to climb through it. On August 13, 1940, Adlertag, Eagle Day, the Luftwaffe begins its sustained assault on RAF Fighter Command. More than 2,600 German aircraft against roughly 640 British fighters. Göring has promised his Führer the RAF will be broken within days. Through August, both sides bleed. The RAF shoots down hundreds of German aircraft and their irreplaceable experienced crews. But Fighter Command is bleeding too. The airfields in southern England are being hit repeatedly. Pilots are dying faster than the schools can replace them. By September 6, 1940, Fighter Command is close to breaking. In the previous 2 weeks, 295 fighters destroyed, 171 more seriously damaged, only 269 new aircraft produced to replace them. 300 pilots lost, 260 replacements from the flying schools, men trained for weeks going up against Luftwaffe veterans. Air Chief Marshal Dowdings is considering withdrawing what remains of Fighter Command to northern England. Reconstitute it there, recommit it only when the invasion beaches are established. If that withdrawal happens, the south of England is open. On September 7th, Germany changes targets. The bombing shifts from the airfields to London. Hundreds of aircraft, the largest raid yet, cross the Channel and strike the capital. Partly it is a misreading of how close Fighter Command is to the edge. Partly it is Hitler's desire to retaliate for British raids on Berlin. Fighter Command's airfields stay operational. The exhausted pilots get a week's breathing room. The radar network holds. The ground crews repair what was damaged, and the RAF that was supposed to have been broken weeks ago is still in the sky over London, still shooting down German aircraft. Germany came closest to breaking Britain at the precise moment it stopped trying to break Britain. By early October, it is clear the Luftwaffe has failed. The RAF has not been destroyed. The airfields are intact, and the barges at Calais are being quietly dispersed. While the generals argued and the Luftwaffe flew, another apparatus was being built. The Sonderfahndungsliste, the Special Search List, is a document of 2,820 names, compiled by the SS with the quiet confidence of a bureaucracy that expects to use its work. After the war, it becomes known, simply, as the Black Book. Virginia Woolf, Noel Coward, H.G. Wells, the exiles who had fled Nazi Europe and found sanctuary in London, Edward Benesch, Charles de Gaulle are there too. Winston Churchill is on the list, designated to be placed in the custody of Amt 6, the Foreign Intelligence Service. The vast majority are designated for the Gestapo. The SS also prepared a companion handbook, the Informationsheft Großbritannien. It analyzes the Church of England and the public schools as potential sources of resistance. It identifies the Boy Scouts. It surveys British museums and art galleries for looting opportunities. It has a section on the structure of the British police and another on the intelligence agencies. There were also plans for transporting 300,000 British Jews to the continent. On September 17, 1940, SS Brigade Führer Franz Six is formally appointed to a command post in London. His assignment: to lead the post-invasion arrests, to implement the Black Book. On September 17, 1940, Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The same day. No further comment is necessary. The cancellation reaches the field in pieces. An officer in Germany's 1st Armored Division near Orléans, Major Graf von Kielmansegg. He was pulled from a cinema on the night of August 28th and told to report to his Chief of Staff. He is certain he is about to receive the order for Sea Lion. He walks in and asks, "Are we on our way?" The Chief of Staff says yes. But not to England, to East Prussia. Hitler, in later private conversation, attributes the failure to the Navy. He expresses keen regret, his aide's record, that I let the Navy talk me out of Sea Lion in the fall of 1940. The bitterness is real. The attribution is wrong. It was never the Navy's fault, or the Army's, or the Luftwaffe's. His strategic pivot east has a kind of internal logic. If Britain will not negotiate, it must be because it hopes Russia will eventually enter the war on the Allied side. Destroy Russia, eliminate that hope, and Britain will finally see reason. It is the reasoning of a man who cannot accept that Britain's refusal is genuine, who keeps looking for the hidden factor, the rational explanation for what appears to him as irrational stubbornness. He looks for it for 5 more years. He never finds it. Return now to where this began. Not Paris, not the Kroll Opera House. Whitehall, a paneled room, 5 men. Late May, 1940. The Dunkirk beaches are full. France has days left. America is neutral. The Soviet Union is Germany's treaty partner. Halifax has done the arithmetic and the numbers are against Britain. He is not wrong about the numbers. He is a patriot reading a genuinely desperate situation, and his reading is accurate. What he cannot put in a column is what Churchill's outer cabinet speech does to 25 men who leave that room carrying something back with them. Something that is not courage as a word, but as a settled fact. What he cannot quantify is a broadcaster who speaks for Britain without authorization and is not considered to have gone too far by a single person in the country. What he cannot measure is a public that picks up propaganda leaflets from the pavement and makes jokes. Anthony Beevor has described the War Cabinet crisis of May 1940 as perhaps the most critical moment of the war when Nazi Germany might have won. The German High Command never knew how narrow the margin had been, never knew the room existed. They spent the entire summer of 1940 trying to understand what Britain was waiting for. They looked for hidden factors. Did a Russian alliance, a military miscalculation that would eventually correct itself? A rational explanation for what seemed, from the Berghof and the planning rooms in Berlin, like irrational stubbornness. Hitler examined it from every angle. Halder wrote it down. Raeder planned for a surrender he was afraid would come with terms too lenient. The SS compiled their lists and wrote their handbooks and designated their commanders for cities they would never enter. They never found the explanation, because there wasn't one. Britain was not waiting for anything. It had already decided. And the men in Berlin, with their field marshals' batons and their invasion directives and their arrest lists for 2,820 people, were building the machinery of coercion for a surrender that had already, in a room they never knew existed, been refused. Now, July 13th, 1940. Franz Halder's diary. The handwriting precise, the ink still dark across 8 decades. It's my impression that the Führer is still unsure and doesn't know what to do.